Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
All right, folks. Give us your best OC horror stories. No skimping. Make us tremble in our shoes. Give us something to think about. Keep our minds in unadulterated fear.
I have always loved fishing. It's a passion that I got from my father, from when he used to take me to the small bridge by the stream outside of town and fish for bass. We usually didn't catch anything, but I loved it all the same. It was simply a joy to be around my dad. He was a simple guy who enjoyed quiet times with a fishing pole in his hands. As I got older, I started going down to the little stream nearby the old factory by myself, since my father rarely had time to fish anymore, due to him often having to travel for work and having little spare time, or energy for that matter, for fishing, or me for that matter. I started seeing these moments by myself as a form of meditation. I found it relaxing to just sit in a secluded spot downstream, away from the bridge, where I could sit on the grassy bank and just watch my lure bob up and down on the water below. The sounds of birds singing in the woods behind me was one of my favorite parts of the solitude. I could sit on that grassy bank and disconnect my brain and dream about everything on my mind: girls, school, the future. As the years went by, fishing remained my favorite activity. Often I'd go straight home from school, pick up my fishing gear, my pole, a box of lures, and an empty glass jar which I'd fill with worms when I got to my fishing spot. There was always worms in the dirt close to the water, so I had everything I needed right there. By the time I was 17, I felt like that little stream was the one constant in my life, and that as long as I could go fish, life would be okay. Through the years, I had gradually started going further and further away from the bridge, always following the winding path of the little stream. And I was starting to enjoy the hikes away from civilization almost as much as the fishing itself. It was part of the charm, I used to think. By now it took me roughly an hour and a half of hiking before I used to settle down, get my gear out, and cast my lure into the water. This far from the bridge, there was no sign of human life. No sounds of cars driving over the little bridge. No sounds from families walking the path that went alongside the road that crossed the bridge. This was pure bliss. In my years of fishing, my ears had gotten used to the songs of the birds, and I could distinguish the type of bird from their calls. This was something I spent a lot of time doing as I laid back in the grass, my fishing rod held upright by being lodged between my bag and the box of lures. I rarely had my eyes open as I laid there. The forest grew thicker and thicker the farther from the bridge you got, and where I was, the foliage was so dense that light could barely penetrate it. So it could get quite dark out there. This was something I had grown to appreciate as part of the seclusion. One such day, as I was laying in the grass next to the stream, lazily slumbering to the sounds of a woodpecker enjoying its day in the woods somewhere close by, I suddenly became startled. I sat up quickly and looked around me, expecting to see another hiker that had followed the stream, but there was nobody there. I calmed down and told myself it was just a trick of the mind and that I was halfway asleep, but I could have sworn I heard a twig break in the woods behind me, as if someone had been sneaking up on me and been unaware of a twig underfoot, but I told myself I was mistaken. I turned my attention to my fishing pole, still sitting there, with my lure bobbing in the water, no sign of any fish as usual, but that was never my focus with fishing. I sighed, relieved that I hadn't had my relaxing moment spoiled by another person hiking by. But chills again seized me. I realized I didn't just not hear sounds of someone else, but I wasn't hearing anything at all. The woodpecker that had been nearby wasn't making any noises, and neither were the crickets that always provided a repetitive chirp from the grass. The forest had become dead quiet. I could hear my breath as my heart was beating faster and faster. I looked around again, and like before, nothing was there, and I was all alone. The concept of being alone had never really struck me as something other than relaxing, since I had always had the company of the animals. I had felt protected by their noises, I realized, but now I was truly alone. For the first time in my life, I felt fear from my seclusion. Paranoid thoughts led me to think about how far away from the bridge I was, I immediately decided to pack up my things and start heading back home, even though it was still early evening according to my clock. Nowhere near the time I usually went home. Most nights I was out several hours longer, but now it felt different. I got up, picked up my fishing rod, and as I reeled in the line and reached for my lure, which was now hanging in the air in front of me, I made a mental note that the hook at the end of the fishing line was gone. But I kept packing, and within minutes I had all my things collected, and I was following the stream in the direction of the bridge. I was more than happy, assuming some fish got a nice meal from the worm that had been hooked, and had also gotten the hook with it when it had left. I had walked for nearly an hour when I moved to put my hand on the strap of my bag. When I had felt something on my finger, I looked down to see that blood was dripping out of a small puncture wound in the palm of my index finger. I stopped walking and looked down at the strap where I had pricked my finger and saw my hook. The hook had completely pierced the strap of my bag. This really puzzled me, almost to the point where I had forgotten the fear I had felt the last hour. And that's when I heard it. Snap. Again, I flung my head around to see if someone was following me, and again, no one was there. But this time I was sure of what I had heard. I was wide awake. It was the sound of a twig snapping under someone's foot. I was sure of it. The fear came back, washing over me like a tide, and I felt the hairs on the back of my head stand up, and I ran. Sure that someone was standing just outside of my view, behind one of the big trees, or hiding behind one of the rocks scattered just inside the tree line, lurking. I ran like my life depended on it, and in my mind at that moment, it did. Sweat poured down my brow as I finally, after what seemed like forever, came in view of the old familiar bridge again. I felt ease. I stopped running and came to a halt as I bent over catching my breath. And when my pulse had lowered and my breath was no longer labored, I relished in hearing the sounds of the birds again. My nerve came back with a sense of bravery, and I chuckled at how I had imagined noises and scared myself into ending a nice day of fishing by being paranoid. I walked to the little bridge, crossed the road, and set out on the small path back towards town. Within 20 minutes, I was walking down the sidewalk and turned up the little path to my house. I kicked off my shoes and greeted my mom. She replied with an annoyed scowl, most likely because I had wasted another day of my life, as she liked to put it. So I continued past her down the hallway towards my room. I have refrained from writing too much about it, but I guess one big reason why I like fishing so much is because of the life I have at home. My mom is a mean person, always angry at Dad for working late and never calling home, always taking it out on me because Dad is usually not around. And when he does get home, he does nothing but drink and sit in front of the TV, sometimes yelling at Mom for not cleaning the house when he's at work. It was no big mystery why I like to be out of the house so much. I put down my bag on the floor, along with my lure box, and placed my fishing rod against the wall in the corner of the room, and went back to the bag to inspect the hook that was caught on the strap. My mind went through scenarios on how it could have ended up piercing the strap of my bag, when I was so sure I had put a worm on the hook, and then cast it and the lure into the water moments before lying back in the grass. Now this was a real mystery, I thought to myself. I put the bag back down on the floor, telling myself I'd get the hook off the strap later, as I was realizing the day had left me hungry. It was not every day I run almost a half-hour non-stop after all. Must have been the adrenaline that kept me going since I was by no means an athlete. I lay down on the bed, pondering what I was going to make myself for dinner, but sleep came quickly. I awoke fully clothed on top of my bed, stomach grumbling after not having eaten since school. A glance at my alarm clock told me it was almost 1 o'clock at night. The house was silent. I got up from the bed and headed for the kitchen, determined to sate my hunger, possibly with slices of whatever I could find in the fridge on a piece of sourdough bread, or in worst case, leftovers from whatever abomination my mom had called dinner that day. I tread carefully, mindful not to wake my mom or my dad, and when I got to the kitchen, I lit the small light above the sink, and I got out some leftover meatballs and 2 slices of bread. As I was slicing the meatballs to put on my sandwich, I absent-mindedly stared out the window in front of the sink. It had a view of our fairly large backyard. The sides of the yard was fenced, but the back of the yard wasn't, since our property also included some trees from the big forest that went on for miles in every direction around our small town. I was just finishing up slicing the meatballs when I froze. I felt the same feeling that had abruptly caused me to end my day of fishing. I nervously scanned the tree line, looking for anything that could have caused the sudden onset of fear. It was so dark that I could hardly see past the first 2 or 3 rows of trees. The dim light from above the sink simply wasn't strong enough. My eyes suddenly fixed to one tree. I stared hard. I couldn't quite make it out, but there was a small patch of darkness, darker than the shadows around it, that poked out from behind the tree. I stared for what felt like minutes, but my eyes were not adjusting to the darkness. The dim light was the only thing illuminating the kitchen, and the first few yards of the tree line outside, I came to the conclusion that I would have to turn off the light to get a better view further into the trees. I flipped the switch, and in the split second after the light turned off, my vision allowed me to see just a little bit farther, and what I saw caused my body to freeze. The dark patch that seemed to have poked out from behind the tree, it had moved, but not before I had seen that it wasn't just a patch of darkness. It was something solid, and 2 small glints had given off the impression of eyes. I stood still like a statue, staring the tree down like it was the barrel of a gun, looking for any sign of movement, but nothing more happened. I had stood in front of that window in the dark kitchen for minutes now. I was sure of it, and I was starting to feel brave, most likely due to standing in my own home. We all feel safe in our own homes. It's like the games you played as a kid where if you make it home, then bam, you're safe. Call it bravery or stupidity, but I had told myself I should investigate. I turned my gaze from the window for the first time in minutes and walked towards the supply closet behind me and retrieved my trusty Maglite flashlight. Feeling like I was invulnerable, I stepped out of the small door leading out into the backyard. Light immediately fixed on the tree I had stared down, and I started to quietly sneak towards the tree. Again, there were no sounds, and I couldn't see anything. I started losing my nerve the closer I got to the tree but I kept sneaking closer to the tree, reminding myself I could run to my door in perhaps 20 to 30 seconds. I was coming up on the tree. I stopped, took a breath, and jumped forward the last few steps, not sure why, probably thinking I'd surprise anyone using the tree as cover. Nothing. I again chuckled at being paranoid and quietly asked myself what was up with me today. First, I had creeped myself out with my imagination when I was fishing, and now I was doing the same in my own home. I turned towards the house to go back inside, and I froze. I can only describe it as a dark face staring at me from the kitchen window. No features could be seen in the dark, but the eyes were burning a bright yellow. I raised my light towards the window in one quick motion, telling myself it was just my dad, and the eyes lighting up was just a trick of the imagination. But before my light could fixate on the window, the face dodged out of view of the window. I felt fear like never before. But I also knew I couldn't just run. Something was inside the house with my parents, and I swallowed the lump in my throat, which felt like a baseball wrapped in barbed wire, and I ran. I reached the door to the kitchen in record time, and I screamed at the top of my lungs for my parents to wake up as I speedily ran through the kitchen, down the hallway to their door. I still couldn't hear anything. The house was silent. I slammed open the door to my parents' room. I just had time to see the outline of my parents lying in the bed, looking like they hadn't woken up. My hand moved towards the light switch, but before my finger could reach it, my hand was stopped, a hand grasping my arm from behind. It hurt a lot. I stood there frozen, sure that I was going to die, and that was the first time I realized the smell that filled the house. It smelled like rotten eggs. The adrenaline as I ran had kept me from actually noticing the wretched odor. My eyes darted to the hand that was grasping my arm, not able to move my head from the fear. The hand looked human, but odd. The fingers were almost 2 times longer than any fingers I had seen before, the skin covered by filthy pale skin. The fingernails were gnarled and a dark color, even in the dim light of the flashlight hanging limp in my other hand, aimed at the floor. I could see that the hand and the arm belonging to whatever was standing behind me was just different enough to feel inhuman. It felt like forever, a small wheeze being the only thing I heard from my unknown assailant, and suddenly my vision turned black and I fell. When I next opened my eyes, I sat up almost forgetting what had happened. I felt the back of my head and felt a wet bump. Looking at my hand, I could see it was blood. I shook off the confusion. Everything came rushing back, and so did the fear. I groggily jumped to my feet, looking in every direction, expecting to see my attacker waiting to attack, but nothing was there. The fear, however, remained. With the smell of rotten eggs and death filling the air of the forest, my eyes darted from tree to tree all around me. Again, the forest was silent. Oh God, I hated the silence. And then I heard it, the sound of a twig breaking. I ran. No sense of where, just away. I dodged between trees, the brush getting thicker and thicker. I heard footsteps following behind me, not getting any closer, but just following. My hands were bleeding from small cuts after powering through the brush, and then I saw the water. I must have woken up close to the large lake a few miles outside of town. I ran towards the water and jumped in, swimming as fast as I could away from the shore. My body was hurting, and my breathing was so labored that I was swallowing water with every breath. I had reached my limit and I had to stop. I coughed, water being expelled from my lungs. I turned around in the water to see if I was being followed. I was both relieved and terrified by what I saw. I wasn't being followed, but my attacker was standing there, a few feet into the forest. I was quite far away from it, but I'll never forget the horrible details of this wretched being. The body was thin, and it was tall, must have been closer to 7 feet tall, and the skin was a dirtied pale color. And the eyes, 2 small, round, yellow dots in large, sunken black cavities. The mouth was agape, with no lips outlining the dark mouth, creating a horrible image forever burned into my memory. It didn't move towards me. The light was starting to come out at this point, and after what felt like an eternity, but was closer to 5 minutes, it turned and disappeared between a tree not to be seen again. I stayed treading water for nearly an hour, fighting through horrible cramps to stay afloat, and I decided to swim towards a small dock at the far side of the lake, away from the forest I had fled from. As I got closer, I recognized the dock as belonging to the local marina. I swam towards it, relieved I could see people standing on the dock. I yelled out, again swallowing water, and I could feel myself struggling to stay afloat. A man saw me, jumped in, and as he reached me, I lost consciousness. I woke up in the hospital, both hands cuffed to the rails of the bed with 2 officers on either side of me who immediately asked me my name and if I remember what happened. I weakly told them in a raspy, gruff voice I barely recognized as my own, and they wasted no time saying I was under arrest for the murder of my parents. It sank in that my parents had been dead when I had reached their door, trying to wake them up. I hadn't had time to think things through since I had decided to investigate the shape behind the tree. I asked what had happened. The officers told me they had been called by our neighbors after they had awoken by me screaming my parents' name. By the time the officers had gotten to our home, the house was empty, aside from my parents, still lying in their beds, looking like they were resting peacefully, both of their throats slit, covers and mattress soaked in blood. They asked who had helped me kill my parents. I screamed that I hadn't killed them and that we had been attacked in the middle of the night, but they didn't believe me. It wasn't long after that, I was taken by the police to a small compound a few towns over, where I would wait for my impending trial. The small cuts on my hands were not severe enough to warrant keeping me under observation, they said. The entire trial felt like a giant slap to the face. I was given no chance to defend myself. I had been threatened by the judge to be removed if I didn't shut up and stop interrupting the proceedings. At one point of the trial, evidence was brought forward saying I had an accomplice in the murders. Photos were presented which depicted the floor of the doorway to my parents' room. On the floor you could see muddy prints from my feet, socks and all. But the footprints behind me, I'll never forget them. Terrifying prints, which looked human enough aside from the sheer size of them, almost twice the size of my own feet. The lawyers didn't even seem to care about this little fact. They just assumed I had worked together with a man with big feet. I was eventually found guilty for the murder of my parents and sentenced to care in a criminal psychiatric clinic for minors, where I would remain until my 18th birthday, where I would then be forcibly admitted to an adult facility for long-term treatment. The case is still open. They're still looking for a man with big feet, and I sometimes get visitors from the police that ask me about my accomplice, as they call it, with a smirk on their face. They never believe me, and I know you won't believe me either. No one ever does. You'll just discredit what I say and call me killer like everyone else. God, I wish I hadn't gone fishing that day. Be asleep in my bed. It is the dead of night, somewhere near 4 a.m. I get woken up by this violent flapping near my ears. My hair is getting thrown everywhere as this thing flails around. My brain is trying to rationalize what the hell is flapping near my head. It is either a bird or a bat that somehow got in through the AC attached to my window. I decide to try and grab it by its wing and peek at what it is. I'm really hoping it is a bird because I do not want to deal with rabies. I picked it up. The wing does not feel like a bird or a bat. It feels like a weird, opaque plastic. I am looking at it through squinted eyes because I do not want to freak myself out, and it is dark in my room. Whatever the fuck it is, it has round wings and a main body. It is actively trying to reach up for my hand, assumedly so I could let it go. I figure since it sure as hell is not a bird, it must be a bat, and if I let go, it will fly into the corner of the room and I can deal with it in the morning. I let go. It immediately flies back to the side of my head and begins its violent flailing again. I realize I have to get up and deal with the thing. I slam my hand on top of the creature to grab it, eyes wide open to see what this thing is. There is nothing there. It is completely empty. I start looking behind my bed frame and under my bed to see if maybe it escaped. There is nothing. No trace of it anywhere. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what just happened. At first, I thought it was a vivid hallucination until I realized you can't grab a fucking hallucination.
I heard a joke once that seeing your wife give birth is like watching your favorite pub burn down. But that's a limey for you. Always worried about the appearance of things and not the experience. The day my wife had Lucy was hands down the best day of my life. Something about seeing a little baby brings tears to your eyes, even mine. Even if I have seen some shit. And keep seeing it, even when I don't want to. Even if Lucy was perfect, and she was, my wife Meg and I weren't so perfect. I was gone a lot with my job, and when I was around I was drinking a lot, so I wasn't so surprised when she said she wanted out. I figured we'd split custody of Lucy, but since I was on the road a lot, it kinda made more sense that Lucy would stay at Meg's. I'd see her on weekends, it'd be great. It was. For a while. Then I started getting busier at work, started dating again, got promoted, found it was harder and harder to see Lucy on the weekends. That turned into trying to see her once a month. Next thing I know, it's just on Christmas, and then that faded away, because who can call a kid once a year and tell them you love them? If you can, you're an asshole. Years get messed up when you get old. 12 years after Lucy was born, I got a call from Meg. She had been crying. She got calm enough to tell me Lucy was dead. Hit and run. She bled out in the street. The last time I saw her, she had been 3. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't decide if that made me a better person or a worse one. It didn't matter. No matter what I did, I wouldn't get her back. I sat on my couch a lot after that. I watched TV, nature programs, mysteries of the deep, shit like that. I had a lot of time. My work had downsized. I was let go in the first round. All the resumes I sent out after never brought back any calls. My mortgage felt huge, like those giant squids they find inside the belly of whales. I had 2 months of unemployment left when I started hearing the knocking at my door. It was always late, 2 or 3 in the morning. I would get up in the absolute pitch black of light, flick on a lamp in the hallway, and creep out to the front door. Have you ever been alone in a house in the middle of the night when someone starts knocking on the door? You know what it feels like. That somebody wants to talk to you in the dead of night, banging on the door loud enough to wake the... Well, I digress. That night, the first night of the door knocking, when I got there and peered out the little window on the side of the door, I didn't see anybody. I turned on the porch light and opened the door, letting in that cold nocturnal wind, the kind that gets the cold right in your bones. Nobody was out there. The rest of the week was quiet. Then on Saturday night I woke up, a pounding on the door. Not a knocking, a pounding. I crept out of the bedroom. I felt like I could see a shadowy shape at the door for a second, but by the time I got there, it was the same as the last time. Nobody. I opened the door and stepped out, looking up and down the street. Nothing. I turned to go back in and then I jumped. My car alarm was going off, loud and piercing, its hazards flashing in the dark. I stepped forward and peered into the intermittently light driveway. I didn't see anybody. It must have been a cat. I went into the house to grab my keys to turn the alarm off. As I was getting them off the kitchen table, I heard the alarm stop. That couldn't have happened, I thought. It doesn't just turn off, things don't stop. I went to rush out, and there in the doorway stood a figure. It was a little girl, standing right on the edge of the doorway, staring at me. It was hard to see her clearly. The only light on in the house was a lamp, and it merely outlined her shape. The majority of her remained defined by shadows. "Excuse me," she said. "Can I come in?" Her voice sounded like an old voicemail on an old phone, distant but permanent. "No, you can't come in," I said. "Please," she said. "I need help." "What happened?" I asked. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to hear what she said. "There was an accident. I need help. I need to make a call." She stepped forward almost into the house, but not into the house, into the liminal space of the doorway. "Let me call my mom." I saw her eyes. They were all black, reflecting me staring at her. I slammed the door. I don't know how, but I did. I slammed the door and fell on the ground. Outside, in the dark, the figure walked out into the middle of the street. There were others like her standing and waiting. I lost sight of them in the shadows. Ever since that, the knocking happens every night. You see, I wasn't the worst dad ever. After I lost my job, I went to visit Lucy. I had a couple of drinks first, of course. Helps with the nerves. I knew I had something, but I didn't know what. I just drove off. When I looked into those black, dead eyes, they looked just like a mirror. And they showed me, but not the me in front of her now. The me in the car. The me that had been behind the wheel. The me who saw her first and who saw her last. Maybe this is how it was always meant to be. I never visited her, but now every night Lucy visits me.
A war story of my grandmom's dad. Finland's war with the Soviets is over, on the condition that the Nazis have to be driven out. Everyone is thinking of going home already. Soldiers are being loaded in trains to Lapland. No one is really paying attention anymore. A bunch of guys want to visit their homes now that the train is running through central Finland. My grandma's dad also jumps off the queue and starts walking home after stealing civilian clothes from a public sauna. He walks all night past two cities' outskirts in full pinecone mode. He is walking in the forest's edge near a field at full moon. He crouches as a car drives on the road through the field. I do not know if it is relevant, but he thought the women's home guard being driven around in the dark was sweet justice for them wearing white. He decides to camp a little further in the woods. He gathers pine needles for bedding and pulls a blanket over himself in the complete dark without fire as to stay stealthy. Autumn is getting colder. It is hard to sleep even in a wind shelter made of twigs. The next morning, he continues walking and home is only half a day away. After a few hours, he hears at least 3 military trucks driving on the road to his right headed where he came from. He picks up the pace. He is finally home and tells his wife how he lost 3 truckloads of MPs just in case he hides in the wheat storage to sleep. He wakes up at night hearing dozens of steps outside. He hears soldiers going into the house and coming out of the house just a minute or less later. Soldiers move in the woods, probably searching for him, or who knows. He has not been updated whether the Russians started war again. He cannot think why they would not search the other houses. He sneaks out of the barn to see if the Russians killed his wife. The outside ground is frozen and the door to the house is open. Inside the house there are snowy boot steps. He finds his wife dead and pale, looking peaceful. He carries her to the sauna and sleeps next to her in there. Outside a little further in the morning are Finnish trucks and no security. He buries his wife and decides he cannot stay away from the war. He skis back in the woods with a rifle from his house. The snow and the fog are getting deeper and are covering all tracks. After over an hour, he finds tracks and soldiers' equipment scattered around in the woods. A big lump the size of a bear on 2 feet that seems to slide on the snow is moving towards him slowly. He feels his fingers losing sensitivity and gets freaked out. Fast forward, he is skiing out of the woods with the lump gliding above ground at sprint speeds. The creature doesn't make a sound except for the sweep as it chases him. He can barely get away. He wobbles straight into the sauna without taking his skis off. He puts the fire on. He leaves the next day feeling the cold ever colder.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.